The title for the sermon this morning is The Outworking of God's Promises. The outworking of God's promises. Is anything too hard for God? Abraham had hope against hope as God proves His merciful fidelity in the promise He has made and He keeps. Great is our Lord. I love that song, and I love singing it with you, and I like better than sitting here listening to a person with an angel's voice give a special, right, as we like to say it in our performance-oriented culture. We're going to give special and we're going to praise God because, oh, look at that person can do what I can't do. It's great, man. I can pull up YouTubes and do that anytime I want. Here's the thing. How often do we get to do what we just did? Right? So I get excited and emotional when I hear God's people together say, "Great are you, Lord. Great are you." And we say it together. I'm not alone saying, "Great is our God." I'm not standing there on the street corner bellowing like I do very often, feeling so very alone. But no, we together get to sing, "All glory be to Christ." And that is a blessed and beautiful thing. So thank you for singing with us. Thank you for singing together and rejoicing in God. And by God's grace, preparing for what's coming. Right? I hope that you have an expectation, the same expectation that I hold in my heart before I come to you, that I'm delivering to you the Word. And that Word would be opened to you, and the eyes of your heart would be opened to be blessed and understand what God has for us. That is my expectation of what I do Sunday in and Sunday out, and I hope that is your expectation of this event as well. So one of the things that I want to explain to you, because sometimes we get excited and then I ruin it, right, by starting to preach. And I've had multiple people come and tell me, "Hey man, I'm loving Genesis, but I would like to dig in deeper." And I say, hearty amen with you, right? And it's not just one person. This is like, I'm telling you, well over a dozen people, different people have come and said, "Thank you, Brian." So this is not, they're not criticizing, but they're just expressing their desire. Cool. Like, I want to keep that going. However, I also want to explain to you why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? First off, I don't imagine you've memorized everything I've ever said, so reiterating something I've already said is an awesome and good thing, right? Why go over these large portions? Well, it comes down to a differentiation of something very technical. It's the differentiation between biblical theology and systematic theology. And we're all naturally systematicians, right? I come to faith in Jesus Christ, I have a question, I seek to answer that question by a verse in the Bible. Correct? Some version of that. I might even just take an answer of a pastor as sufficient, right? And then I have all of these questions, and these questions systematically form my worldview, the way I view the world. Here is the thing: if I create my own system, is my system going to be the same as your system? Probably not. Are my questions going to be the same as your questions? Maybe. Mankind seems to have the same questions that they ask down through the eras and through the eons, and in time you develop this corpus of questions that define systematic theology, and then you realize, just in my office I have 7 different 1,200-page books that are a systematic theology that really they're just answering questions, and they all answer them differently. And so, if that is how we approach things, it may seem hopeless to really understand what's going on in the Bible, because questions and answers and the ways questions are asked and the mechanism in which they are answered might be different, and that's why you have so many different books, right? We are going over large sweeps because I want to engage you in a biblical theology. Now, that's not a slight on the systematicians, and I have a very defined system. However, my system is informed by my biblical theology. What is a biblical theology? Well, instead of just taking a verse from Genesis or a smattering of verses from Genesis, I tried to understand Genesis on the whole. And if you've been along with us at all to this point, you realize we've had just, 3 sermons? And we're already into chapter 17? And in those 3 sermons, I've tried to demonstrate chapters 1 through 11 are introductory matters of the first 2,000 years of human history, demonstrating that God is a creator God and mankind is rebellious, right? And then in that, God has made promises to mankind and covenant with mankind, some in which man has broke, and I should say all of them that man has broke, but God has kept. At chapter 12, we come down into this place of more of a microscopic view, right? Because from chapter 12 to chapter 50, we have only a couple hundred years versus the 2,000 previous that we've gone through. And we go through a particular family rather than all the nations that have been mentioned. This is intentional. God has intentionally not answered our questions, but displayed something He wants us to know, and that's important. Do you think God owes you an answer? If you're an American, you probably have to say yes. However, let me tell you, God owes you nothing, right? He doesn't owe you an answer. And just because you can ask the question doesn't mean He is going to answer that question, all right? Just look at Jesus. Right? How often did they ask Him questions and He's like, meh, and He goes off and says something else and you're like, that doesn't even close to answer the question. Right, He's the creator, okay? He is condescending to inform us how things are. And as He does that, our questions aren't as important as what He has revealed to us. And so rather than getting all twisted about my question not being answered or whatever it is, maybe we should try to take the biblical theological approach and just see what God is trying to say. It's kind of like being in an argument with your sibling or your spouse or a neighbor. Try to figure out what they're saying. Rather than making an assumption about what they're saying, rather than provide their argument for them, which is probably some contorted and twisted picture of the argument, actually hear them in what they are saying. We need to do the same thing to the Word of God, and particularly to God. What is God saying? Very often we take our systematic approach and we imprint onto God what we think He's saying rather than trying to figure out in all earnestness what He's saying. So the biblical theological approach is a terrible amount of work. In that I just explained to you, trying to figure out what He's saying is a lifetime endeavor. We joke in our culture as men that, we can't figure women out. Well, first off, ladies, you can't figure men out either. In reality, it's not a male-female thing. It's a person problem in which we just can't figure it out, whatever it is. We walk around looking through a glass dimly, the Bible tells us. We have this picture of life in which we're trying our best to figure things out. And then God does us a favor, and He specifically, specially, particularly reveals to us what He wants and what He's doing in this life through His Word. It's actually pretty phenomenal. It's pretty phenomenal that He has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of Him, the knowledge in which He has revealed to us. The knowledge of Him is not going to come from my intellect. The knowledge of Him is not going to come from my capacities of reasoning. Oh, I'm so smart and I figured God out. Great. No, you didn't. When Peter confesses in Matthew 16 that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and Jesus says, flesh and blood has not revealed that to you. Who has? His Father up in heaven, right? The same thing is existent here. God reveals Himself in His Word, and even taking the major effort to swath through all of these chapters together to understand what's there. If we start back in chapter 12, what happens at chapter 12? You have a major shift in the text of Genesis. God comes down and He talks to Abraham, or Abram at the time. As He talks to Abram, He gives him a promise. Go back and look at the promises, verse 1 through 3, and kind of greater details and following. But in that, He gives him this promise, and all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. This is the beginning of God's covenantal proclamation to Abraham that takes approximately 25 years to get all of its fullness out. But He makes it very specific covenantal promise that displays God's purpose through Abraham and why we're coming to him. This blessing that seemingly is unreachable for mankind for the first couple thousand years, that they only ended up sitting there staying in chapter 11, we are going to make a name for ourselves. What happens in chapter 12? God says, Abraham, I'm going to make a name for you. I am going to make a name for you. He doesn't want Abraham to make a name for himself. He says, I'm going to make a name for you. And I'm going to bless all the families of the earth through you. In chapter 13, what do we get? We get this beautiful, this is a forever promise, by the way. I'm going to bless you and your offspring. All right, it gives it the singular. And then you get into chapter 15 and we go into the plural. And in chapter 15 he says, oh yeah, I'm going to be the one that keeps it absolutely. So that whole weird smoking pot and torch that are going through the cut pieces of animal and stuff like that, that is the essence of a suzerain treaty or a covenant of the suzerains in which it was supposed to be both parties walking through the halves of the animal. And if you don't keep your part of the covenant, this is going to happen to you, right? And then God, in the presence of God, manifest in that pot, in that torch, says, no, I'm the keeper of this. And so you have these promises that end up going through, and then you have this story, this comparison of Abraham and Lot all the way through. And Lot's kind of a chucklehead, right? I mean, if you go through, you're just like, Lot might be asleep at the wheel, right? And yet, here's Abraham, also, at times, appearing not much different than Lot. Come across Pharaoh, what did he do? Oh, it's my sister. Right? Pharaoh takes her. God afflicts the house of Pharaoh. Then you come across Hagar. Right? God just promised him in chapter 15, hey, you're going to have a kid by you. And Sarah's like, well, that's going to be impossible for me, so here's Hagar. Take her. That's a foolish act, right? Absolutely. Doesn't get the point of Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Obviously. So he falls down on that. And then we're going to learn a little bit later today. He gives her away again to Abimelech after he said, you're going to have a child by Sarah. That's actually where we start today. Now, as you cover and course through that, what you're going to see in the whole thing, and the whole story, and the whole narrative that is present there, that God is faithful to God's purpose and promise all the way through. And I've always tried to ask myself, why did you choose Abraham? And as I read and reread through this, I've come across passages in later texts that said, I chose you because I loved you. I didn't choose you because you were the greatest. He gave it to us in the negative. I didn't choose you because you were the greatest. Okay, well then why did you choose us? Did you choose us because we were the smallest? No, I chose you because I chose you. I always want to ascribe the reason for choosing is because God maybe knew that Abraham would be faithful, and yet God chose him prior to any expression of fidelity by Abraham. Now all of a sudden the theologian has to go back and drink his own medicine, right? God doesn't owe me that answer, one. Two, the way he answers it may not be satisfying. Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases, the Bible tells us. He chooses one for honor and the other for dishonor. God's choosing is God's choosing, and it doesn't get answered the way that I want. But we see two particular things going on here. Abraham definitely is responsible, and God is definitely the Savior. If you take your Bible and turn to 1 Peter, we're going to see in story form as we actually get into the text what is written in 1 Peter here in what is called a didactic manner. So in 1 Peter, a didactic manner simply means it's written in lawyer speech, right? It's written in very succinct terms to convey major ideas, where in Genesis it's written in narrative, sweeping large stories being told. Well, here in the first few verses of Peter, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, and I'm going to read down through verse 7, so 1 Peter 1, 3 through 7. In this passage here, we see the lawyer speech for what we're about to read and the narrative speech, right? We start out, 1 Peter 1, 3, Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to His great mercy, He has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who is our Savior, who causes regeneration, who causes new birth, who brings life. Jesus, right? And He has saved us. He has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For what? Well, to an inheritance. To an inheritance that is imperishable, unfading, and undefiled. Do you know anything in life that is unperishable, unfading, and undefiled? Anything. Silver? Gold. Palladium. What? Anything? That shiny new car? Oh, wait a second. It drops in value a significant amount the moment you drop it off the lot. Tarnishes immediately. Then you have a 3-year-old come over with a rock and write his name in your door, right? That's life. There's nothing undefiled, unfading. There's nothing that is imperishable. But our inheritance is that which is given to us. What is an inheritance? Something that is given to us that we did not earn. It is something somebody else earned that they are handing to us. And so, we've been caused to be born again through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead to this inheritance. And it is being kept where? Kept in heaven for us. By what? The power of God. Who by God's power are being guarded. So who guards you in this? God. Through what mechanism? Through faith. And your mind might just go off the rail there, because who am I ascribing everything to at this point? God, 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 God. And then He's doing it through what? Faith. Faith is indeed mysterious. Faith is a mysterious reality that God has placed us within, in which it's this gift, and yet it's this thing that we function in. It is an absolute gift that God has given us, and yet it is the conduit through which God's grace flows. We just spent the time in Sunday school talking about supplementing your faith, right? Adding to your faith. Going through life and living life and taking these things unto yourself. Virtue and knowledge, self-control and steadfastness, patience and brotherly love, and on. These are components of our faith. And here in the story of Genesis, we see not only God's promise being enacted, but we see Abraham going through this stuff in and over years. I mean, it's an absolutely amazing thing. He got called out of the land of Ur. He got separated from everybody, but he's got a barren wife. Lot comes with him. He has a bigger group of people that he's traveling with. They become so prosperous that they have to separate immediately, which Lot then runs into problems. Abraham fashions an army, and I went and read about this, and I should have said this last week, but I read about this week. The armies that he went and fought are massive, and he took 318. He should have been laughed off the battlefield. Yet he separated his forces and whipped Ben-Hadad's butt. Phenomenal. Why? Because of God. It's not because, well, they were well-trained mercenaries who had the art of, CQB, close quarters combat, and blah, blah, blah. No. They were herdsmen that, yes, they were trained, but guess what? God had favor upon them. So you come to Sarah and Hagar, you then come to all these promises, and in this last promise, last week we finished with the idea that Abram is no longer Abram, he's Abraham. And this week we transition into Sarai is no longer Sarai, she is Sarah. Marked out by God with a sign of the covenant that is distinct and different. Verse 15 of chapter 17. God said to Abram, As for Sarah, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. Not Ishmael, not anybody else, but by Sarah. I will bless her, and she shall become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Let's stop. 99 and 100 respectfully. If we read Romans 4 that we did this morning, his body was as good as dead, and hers all dried up and used up. No wonder their response. he laughs and is like, but you got Ishmael. Nope, from her. From her he is going to come. And you begin to see something about God. God chooses sometimes the least. God chooses sometimes the most insignificant. And God chooses the most improbable. How probable is birth at this age? Not to get too terribly personal, but ladies in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, how exciting would it be to be pregnant right now? Not one of you is going to be like, oh, I'm going to sign up for it. And yet God promises she's going to bear this child, going to be fruitful and multiply with this everlasting covenant where the kids are going to be greater than the stars. And ironically, when you get to the end, if I believe it is chapter 24, you have or 22, you have an accounting of Abraham's brother's kids, And it seems like the promise is more fit for this guy than the guy that has one kid and is about to have a second, and the first kid is not even going to be accounted in the promise. Right here, God is working in the most improbable way, and yet He is going to be the God who keeps His promise. So the birth of Isaac is promised. He says, here's the sign of circumcision. This is the sign of covenant. And where did Abraham have faith? Before the sign of the covenant. Before circumcision had, what did Abraham have? Faith. And it was counted to him as righteousness. So he wasn't righteous because he got circumcised. His circumcision came as a marker of his faith. Similar to baptism for us. Baptism does not save you, but if you're unwilling to put the marker of baptism on you, where is your salvation? Who are you marked out with? Is there a covenant community that you are a part of? Right here, God likes the sign, likes the symbol, marks it out clearly. And so Abraham, what does he do? 13-year-old Ishmael, circumcise him. What about his 318 men? Yep, y'all get it too. Oh man. I'm sorry, just to kind of break away for a half a second. How would that be? Hey, the boss says we need to get circumcised. I didn't sign up for this. Is this part of my retirement plan? What's going on here, right? To imagine the conversations in the tent that night after Abraham said this. And here, everybody gets circumcised. All the men of the house, born in the house, those who were bought with money from a foreigner, all were circumcised. The covenant community was marked out. So you get into chapter 18. What happens in chapter 18? They're hanging out by the oaks of Mamre. And as they're hanging out by the oaks of Mamre, you have what is called a Christophany. And we could spend 3 months talking about that. These are one of the disappointing things. It's like, oh, that's so awesome. Let it suffice that a pre-incarnate Lord walked up to him, and Abraham knew immediately who he was. 2 angels, one on each side walking up. Abraham runs up, and you're going to end up seeing a comparison between Lot's behavior and Abraham's behavior. At the heat of the day, in the middle of the day, he does what? He slaughters a cow, he gets milk and curds, he gets bread, everything's made up. He treats them with the royal treatment. Even to the standpoint that he stands there at attention in service to the Lord. He takes the best of what he has. And with hospitality, he welcomes him in. And in verse 9, after all of this has gone down, he asks him, where's Sarah? Verse 9, chapter 18. They said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, she is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women has ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out, and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? Now, I know a lot of people make the big deal between Abraham and Sarah and the difference between one's laughter and another, and why did she receive rebuke and he didn't? I believe they both received rebuke. Abraham tried to come up with a new solution. No, do this, Lord. He's like, nope, here's how it is. So the Lord said to Abram, why did Sarah laugh? And say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old? I think the engagement and the recording of this is as much for the next verse, verse 14, as anything else. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That is a question we could sit and meditate upon after He gives the sign of the covenant. Is there anything that is too hard for the Lord? The answer is an obvious, no, there is not. With man it's impossible, but with God all things are possible, right? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Sarah denied it, saying, I didn't laugh. I honestly think her laughter was in some manner something that many of us would express. It's the same thing that Abraham expressed. Are you kidding me? I got Isaac or Ishmael right here. Is this really the route we're going to go? Yes. Is anything too hard for me? Ask yourself that. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? Are there situations and circumstances in your life that you are like trusting yourself in? Bad place to place trust. Trusting you above God? Trusting our government above God? Ooh, that's even worse. Trusting, fill in the blank. What is it? What are you trusting more than God? I absolutely love this passage. This is, again, something we could spend an immense amount of time just contemplating the consequences of this statement. Is there anything too hard for God? The answer is no, there is not. And God, in the most improbable fashion, brings about His promises and His purpose for His people to be a blessing unto the world, and it manifests itself in the person of Jesus Christ, right? The cross of Christ, the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and then for us now, the future return of Christ. He brings about His purposes, and we sing of them. We sing, all glory be to Christ. Is that just a good song because it's written in the New Year's Eve term or song tune? May all acquaintance be forgot. Ha, ha, ha. I don't know the rest of the words. Ha, 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 ha. Right? And we sing with our head and we, you know. Oh, it's a catchy tune. Is that why we like singing it? Man, I hope not. I hope we like singing it because it thrills our heart that all glory is to Jesus Christ. All glory is to the God who is able to do anything at any point. And when you read this story, you come across and you're like, oh yeah, I may have been like Sarah and Abraham, laughing at the possibility and potential reality things. And God says, is it too hard for me? No, it's not too hard for Him. And I'm not saying whatever our fanciful imaginations, Lord, is it too hard for you to make me a unicorn? It's dumb. It's not too hard for Him. He could, but stop being dumb, right? If you have a unicorn issue, we'll talk about it later, but you get my point. Within the spectrum of God's purpose and intended plan that He has laid out for us and which He is doing for us here, I am going to bless you in the most improbable way through the most improbable family that is old. You guys are old. The way of woman has ceased to be with you. You're used up. But look at me go. Look at me go. So they kind of finish the meal. Takes a little time. They break it all up. Everybody's partying, and Abraham walks down the hill with them. The angels go down to Sodom. He's like, hey, should I tell them what we're going to do? He's like, yeah, I promised to bless them. The Lord answers His own question. And he goes down and he goes, an outcry is raised from Sodom. They're terrible. We're going to go down and destroy them maybe, if what I find, if I think is true. So Abraham starts into an argument, if you will. A little bit of pleading. Verse 22, chapter 18. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And he goes through this argument. If there's 50 righteous, Lord, be patient with me. If there's 45 righteous, 40, 35, 30, 20, 10. If there's 10 righteous, will you spare these people? And what does God say? He displays His character. He's like, yes, even for the precious few, I will spare their lives. And you see two things happening here. You see the mercy of God, and you see how Abraham becomes, reflexive of his Lord. You might think that Abraham is kind of salty about the fact that Lot chose the better portion. You might think he's kind of salty about the fact that I've already had to go deliver him, my punk nephew, right? I've already had to do this. Nope, none of that. Are you going to wipe out those good folks too? He's concerned. He's concerned for the righteousness of God. He's concerned for what is good. And He has mercy on his mind. And so in the argument he enters into, this dialogue with the Lord, he demonstrates that our God is a God with us, but our God is also a God who cares to hear our plea. Are you going to stand in righteousness? And God is like, yes. And what a concern Abraham has. What a concern of faith he possesses for God's own name. So what happens in chapter 19 when they go down? Chapter 19 is one of the hardest chapters in my mind in the book of Genesis. It's full of all kinds of terrible, awful things. They go down, the two angels are there. They go into the city square. Lot is sitting where? By the city gate. What does this demonstrate? Lot is a man of reputation within the community of Sodom. Lot is not just a guy that has a house on the outskirts of town. If he is sitting in the city square, who is he? A man of reputation, a man of social standing within the community. So he goes to them, and in this odd theatrical way is like, oh no, come stay with me, come stay with me, come stay with me. If you recognize who they are, maybe you're trying to rescue Sodom and not these men. Especially when you get them into your house and you only give them food, when in the evening you should have a considerable amount more if you're a man of reputation and position. But he gives them bread. And then when the Sodomites come to the house and beat on the door, asking for those men that they may know them, which is another phrase for rape them in the street, he's like, take my virgin daughters. You have lost your mind. Take my Are you serious? Have you become one like Sodom, Lot? See a lot of things interplay here. The way that Lot and Abraham both received the angels of the Lord differently. The amount of hospitality they had and the extent to which the hospitality was extended. It's not just one was better at hospitality than the other. It's the fact that one had priorities so far out of whack within his own community that there was no genuine hospitality. He was willing to give his daughters over to being raped in the streets so that his guests wouldn't receive that. And in all honesty, I think there was probably a thing in Lot's mind of, I don't want these angels to do what they've come to do. So as Lot is fighting off the masses of the depraved, saying, don't take these men, the angels strike him blind, grab him, pull him back in, and said, you're out in the morning, we're wiping this joint out. And he lingers. A little bit different than lingering for being called for dinner. Have you ever done that? It's dinner time, and nobody comes. Hey, food's ready. And it's on the table getting cold, and everybody's still just doing their thing. Happens at family gatherings, right? We're praying. 3 people pray, and then everybody shows up. Oh, did you guys already pray? Like 15 minutes ago, I've eaten twice. This is a different kind of lingering. It's almost like a lingering of he doesn't want to leave the place that he kind of has an affection for. The place in which he sits at the gate of the city as a man of reputation. He goes and tells his son-in-laws, hey, this is going to happen. They think he's joking. They can't even take him serious enough. He seems to be a fool, right? The angels force him out. And as they go out, the no-name wife, what does she do? We know it well. She turns and looks upon, longing after what they've left. I think the lesson that we can take home from this is we should not long after Sodom. We should not long after Sodom. And if we get caught and being in the city gate of Sodom, it is hard to get out. And there was a particular favor expressed to Lot because of Abraham. There was a common grace shown to him when he says, those who bless you I will bless, and those who curse you I will curse. Here is one who, though he does not receive the grace of God, at least receives the mercy of God. And how often do we live in a world in which the mercy of God is received and held, and yet there is no repentance? We live in a Sodom-like place. And the word should send a mild shudder down your spine every time that it is said. We live in a world where promiscuity and sexuality is looked past, is not a big deal. And we don't see how it robs our faith in God. And we don't see the fact that we should be like an Abraham. So they get out, and it gets worse. It doesn't get better. They go to Zoar, go to the little town. He goes into Zoar, then is afraid that he's not going to survive there, so he bounces out to the cave. And what happens? His daughters take advantage of him. Because now we're not going to have kids, and having kids and lineage is super important. So they have relations with dear old drunk dad in the cave, and then out come the Moabites and the Ammonites, right? Why is that significant? Why is that being written down? Because even for that miserable situation, God's promise comes true. And why are the Moabites significant? Well, Ruth, Boaz, the greatest king that Israel ever knew, right? Lot's line seems to have a manner of redemption and mercy given and placed within it. And we see God's mercy, we see God's grace that the Ammonites and the Moabites, who have forever put in their names the reality, if you go look at the etymological structure of the names, it's forever marked as, we're people of incest. And yet God still brings redemption even out of that. Even out of that. That is, in my estimation, an extremely hopeful reality that even though out of Sodom is all of these terrible and awful things, God is even willing from there to bring redemption. Gives us great encouragement to trust the Lord. Is anything too hard for the merciful Lord? We see God's wrath expressed. We see judgment over Sodom as it's destroyed. And then chapter 20 picks right up where chapter 18 left off. Chapter 18, we finish with Abraham standing there with the Lord. And then he kind of goes away, and you have a cutaway to what happens in Lot's city of Sodom. And then in chapter 20, Abraham's traveling. He goes down to Gath, essentially. Let's read Genesis 20, verse 1 and following. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negeb, and lived between Kadesh and Shur, and he sojourned in Gerar. And Abraham said to Sarah his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Now let's stop there. This is Philistia, right? That's why I say it's Gath. When you look at the map and you go, it's right in there. So these are Philistines. They worship Molech. They are not God-fearers. Abraham later expresses that. Abimelech's, why'd you do this to me, man? Because now all the women are barren. There's some time for this to play out. It's approximately 3 months, right? Nobody's having kids. A plague has struck the house again. Abimelech does not get to sleep with Sarah. And Abimelech comes to Abraham and is like, why'd you do this to me, man? Somebody who doesn't fear the Lord, somebody who worships idols, somebody who sacrifices children on altars. And yet he responds to the Lord. And then Sarah's returned to her. And you might be shaking your head, the whole first giving away of your wife, the second giving away from your wife. Haven't you learned anything, man? And then the whole Hagar issue. What's going on here, Abraham? I think it shows us a couple of things. One, God does not deliver Abraham because Abraham is somehow just a step better than everybody else. Because this is a pretty heinous thing. And in the middle of Abraham doing this dunderheaded thing and not thinking, what does God do? God keeps him. God keeps him. Have you ever been thankful for the things that God keeps you from? And have you ever been thankful for the things that God lets you go through? Right here, Abraham and Sarah have had to go through some terribly difficult things as a result of their own sin. And yet, in the middle of that, God keeps them all the way. God keeps His promise. Promises kept. That's how we should label this. Promises kept. Because if you go through and read the rest of the story in chapter 20, what you see is that God keeps His own promise. And what was His promise? Just in chapter 17, Sarah, you're going to have the kid. Well, now, isn't that threatened as she potentially is going to be having sex with another man? Yeah, absolutely. That's threatened for the progeny of Abraham that is supposed to be the child of promise. This offspring no longer can be because of what might happen there. And so, all these cattle, all these livestock, all the stuff in chapter 20 is given as a marker to say, I didn't do anything to that woman. Abimelech wanted that to be known because God came in and said, I'll kill you. Give her up. So He does. I rejoice in that reality on a daily basis because I cannot keep me. Try as I may, I am going to fail in my flesh at some point, and yet God keeps me. My salvation and security of salvation rest in God's keeping His promise. Praise God. And what does it draw us to? Hopefully praising God. You get into chapter 21 and you have the birth of Isaac. Chapter 21 verse 1. The Lord visited Sarah as He had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as He had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age at the time of which God has spoken to him. Abraham called the name of the son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, and as God had commanded. How old was Abraham? 100. How old was Sarah? 99. And what did Abraham do? He believed God. He believed God and he obeyed God. He did what God said. Yep, Abraham, you've had your struggles, but what do? Here you are on the 8th day doing what God commanded you. Trusting in the Lord, having learned of the Lord's fidelity and faithfulness, having learned of the Lord's mercy and goodness. So you go through that whole thing and you have Hagar and Ishmael protected. You have the treaty with Abimelech, and then we get to chapter 22. And here is a month's worth of sermons. I'm going to try to boil down in 7 minutes. All right? So take a deep breath. You only got 7 left. Maybe. All right? What happens in chapter 22? He asks for Isaac back when Isaac's about 15. So Abraham's approximately 115 years old here. Isaac's about 15 years old here. We get into chapter 22, and this happens. 22 verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here I am. He said, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Got to point that out in the request, right? You really like this one. And go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Kind of serious, right? When you get down into the narrative and the storytelling of this whole thing, that's kind of a radical thing that brings up all kinds of questions. Seriously? You're going to ask this? I have been waiting for him. I waited for him for 25 years. I've now had him for the past 15. And here you are going to ask me for him? And what does Abraham do? Sarah, we're going on a camping trip. Back in a few days. Let's go, boy. And off they go. How often do we make the gift more important than the gift giver? And here the gift giver has said, do you worship me or the gift? What is the gift? Isaac. Because of the promise. I'm going to bless you through. Here's your heritage. Here's your lineage. Here's your namesake. Here's the thing that is going to make your name great. I want it back. What would you do? How often do we, as the recipients of gifts, think that the gift is more important than the gift giver? Let's break it down to a nice little analogy here. How many coffee cups have you dads received over the years? I have 1 million. Do you know where I receive these coffee cups from? My children. Now, not all of us are dads. You know, moms have their own thing, and everybody has some sort of something like that where someone in your life has given you something where you're kind of like, that's nice. I didn't think I needed a 17th one of these, or I didn't need... And how often do we kind of poo-poo that gift rather than seeing the beauty of it? Rather than seeing the beauty of the necktie, or the coffee cup, or the thing that is scrawled on in that room over there by a niece or a nephew or your child, to which we summarily walk out the door and go... Now, I'm not advocating you keep all those arts and crafts. I've thrown away plenty of them in my life. However, what's more important than that art and craft, and then even the gift, is the gift giver and the reality of what happens in the gift given. And I'm not just advocating for us to be thankful towards the gift giver in our birthday exchanges and our holiday exchanges. I'm asking us to look at the Savior and to look at God and see the gift that He's given us. And sometimes we either make the gift more important than the gift giver, or we just think the gift is unimportant from the gift giver and walk away. And yet here's the most significant gift of Abraham's life. And what does God say? I want it back. And he says, okay. Why did he say okay? Because he trusts that God can bring him back from the dead. He trusts that God can bring life from nothing. He trusts that God will be a keeper of His promises. And he knows what God has promised. He knows what God has promised. He knows what God will give. He's been through the path where he's asked the question, is anything too hard for God? And look at him where he is years later. 35 years into the onset of this promise. 35 years. You could say that he's been a believer for that period of time. Look at the maturity that is present within him. When God says, I want the gift back, he says, okay. Why does he say okay? Because he trusts Him. So take the time this afternoon to read this story and see the trust that he has. And where does he finish? Well, let's start in verse 9. When they came to the place which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in the order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. So this is not play acting, by the way. He's not like holding the knife up here like, all right, God, anytime you want, you can stop. No, he's into it. He's doing what God has said. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God. Seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, on the mount of the Lord, it shall be provided. God is the God of provision. If God commands you to do it, if God asks you to do it, He will provide what is necessary for you to do it. God is the one who is going to give you what you need. The gift giver and the gift, in reality, are the same thing. And so what do we learn from Abraham and his trajectory, the 35 years of life that we've been with him thus far? We see that he has grown. We see that he fears the Lord above all else. And we see that he understands God to be who he is: merciful, patient, long-suffering, kind, the provider. How often do we think we are the provider? Men, how often do you have anxiety as a result of thinking you've got to be the one to provide here? How about you single people? How about you those that are off on your own? You got to provide food for your mouth. Take care of yourself. Moms, what about taking care of your kids? You got to provide a good home and a good environment. And the list goes on. Any one of you in this room can think and take provision into your own account and own hand. Who is the provider? Who is going to give us what we need? And is anything impossible for God? Hopefully we see, as we cover these big passages, that reality. Nothing is impossible for Him as He provides all that you need. Let's pray. Father, we thank You for this morning. We thank You for who You are. We thank You for what You've given us. We thank You that You are the God to whom all glory is due, who sustains and upholds all things. I thank You that You are the God who nothing is impossible for. Father, may we hold tight and true to Your promises, and may we see Your purposes. May we rejoice always in who You are, and how through this one family, through Abraham and his offspring, You bless all the families of the earth. I thank You for this time. Bless us now as we sing one more song together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.